All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Gifford. I am a colonel for now 3 days in the U.S. Army. I am a functional area 52 nuclear counter-WMD officer. Um, I have spent the last 4 years at DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, running the nuclear wargaming team that they had set up in their R&D section. And then this summer, I moved over to the Eisenhower School at the National Defense University, where I'm currently on faculty. So I'm going to talk to you guys, since you're here today, about nuclear wargaming and the importance of not letting it just be game over. Just a little bit more about me. Why is this Army guy talking about nuclear weapons? Because the Army doesn't have nuclear weapons. So, like I said, I'm a nuclear weapons officer for the Army. I actually have a Ph.D. in nuclear engineering, specifically nuclear fallout. So I'm going to do my best when I get to the fallout section not to nerd out too much and spend too much time. But I've got the technical expertise as well as the operational expertise in the Army. So that's why I'm talking to you about this. And I want to point out, as it says at the bottom, everything today is my own views and opinions, and no way do I reflect that or imply that that's what the DoD says. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. I know a lot of you are here for wargaming, so this shouldn't be a surprise to you. But if you think of a typical DoD war game that goes nuclear, boom, there goes a mushroom cloud. This is kind of the consensus. So, I say that as a tongue-in-cheek, joke there, and I see in the chat someone just posted exactly the point I'm going to make, that most war games that go nuclear, right, the mushroom cloud is index, right? Oh, nuclear weapon happened, index. We pass that on to Stratcom and the U.S., and they're going to nuke them, and great, game over, we win, go home, right? No one ever plays past the nuclear explosion, and it is game over, man. So that is exactly why I'm here, because it shouldn't be game over. So, nuclear weapons, why are we talking about these? No one uses these anymore. Thinking about, if you're not that familiar with nuclear weapons, the last nuclear weapon used actually in war was 9 August 1945 in Nagasaki. The last above ground U.S. nuclear test was July 9th, 1962, the Starfish Prime at exo-atmospheric test. You can see the middle picture on the right. And it's 900 miles from Hawaii, blast 400 kilometers, about 1.4 megatons in space. Pretty cool. The last U.S. underground test, in fact, after Starfish Prime, we decided to stop going above ground because we took out 6 of the 19 satellites in low Earth orbit at the time. So we moved underground. We stopped underground testing in 1992. The Russians stopped their last official nuclear test was 1990. For the UK, 1991. The Chinese, 96. Pakistan and India were in May of 98. And North Korea, the newest player in the nuclear world, right? It was September 2017 was their last nuclear test. So why nuclear weapons? No one uses them, right? Well, that's actually not true. If you talk to anyone from Stratcom, we use our nuclear weapons every single day. And this is taken directly from the Nuclear Matters Handbook you see there on the right from 2020. So it is the bedrock of our U.S. national security, and our nuclear deterrence underwrites every U.S. military operation, right? It is our big stick, if you will, that we can go into places and say, well, if you want to mess with us, we got nukes. And people, a lot of times will back down or at least think twice about what they're going to do. So we do it every single day to maintain peace around the globe. We have kept Russia in check for many, many years and throughout the Cold War with our nuclear arsenal without ever actually shooting them, right? Or using them and having them cause an explosion. But our adversaries have nuclear weapons too, and they're using theirs every day. Russia is modernizing its nuclear arsenal. You don't have to look very long on, a Google search. Hey, Russian nuclear saber rattling. I mean, Putin's throwing out nuclear threats all the time. He supposedly is moving his tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus. That is definitely a, scare tactic, a threat against NATO to keep NATO from getting involved in the Ukraine war. And how effective it's been, that's up for other people to discuss, but it's definitely something Russia is using their nuclear weapons. And China, they don't do a lot of nuclear saber rattling, but they are definitely increasing their nuclear arsenal. I've heard estimates that they're, by 2030-ish timeframe, they're going to be on par with have as many nuclear warheads as we do, because they know to be taken seriously by us, right now they have a lot less than us. So we have more nukes than they do, so we're not really, we can put them in their place. We can be the bully, if you will. But they want to get up to par with us, and then it becomes a little different the way we interact with China as they grow their nuclear arsenal. And this is just, again, if you're not super familiar with nuclear weapons, this just shows, our two main nuclear adversaries, Russia and China. And this is the ways that we can deploy our nuclear weapons. This has nothing to do with the nuclear warheads themselves. This is just our ways to deploy. So for all these pie charts, upper left and tan, that's the land-based systems. Bottom right is the air-based systems. And then to the top right is the sea-launched ones, so mostly the subs. So you can see if you look kind of at everybody else compared to the United States, they have more options than we do. And we just have fewer deployment mechanisms. And, we have the same number of deployed warheads as Russia by the New START treaty, but you can see they are developing more than we are. They all have, things they're planning that we haven't done yet. Whether, why that is, that's for another discussion, but just to show that our adversaries have a lot of nuclear weapons, and by us ignoring them or treating them as index, we are doing our fighting men and women a disservice. So the bad guys have nukes. What do we do about it? Well, both the more updated than the 2020 nuclear handbook is the 2020 National Defense Strategy and Nuclear Posture Review. Both of these tell us to prepare to operate in the context of a nuclear detonation. And here's just some snippets here. And what you can see here is, limited nuclear, limited nuclear, limited nuclear. You can see from excerpts from each of these. So we're not talking, when I'm talking nuclear wargaming, I'm not talking the, let's wargame mutually assured destruction and how many nukes do we need to use to take out all of their nukes and wipe Russia off the face of the map, if you will. What we're talking about here is a limited nuclear exchange with a nuclear armed adversary, a handful of nukes of 1, 10s, 20s, that doesn't escalate to full nuclear war, right? And there's a lot of people that talk about deterrence theory and escalation theory and say that it's very probable that our adversaries would use a small, limited number of nuclear weapons to try to get us to halt combat operations if we're winning, right? That's a way to throw some nukes on, a few nukes out there, and us go, whoa, 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 we don't want to go there. Let's hold off. Let's take a break, time out. Let's talk this through, and kind of de-escalate the conflict. It's a lot of sometimes you might have heard escalate to de-escalate was a Russian doctrine at one time. A few nuclear weapons to try to get us kind of call our bluff, if you will, that we don't want to go nuclear. So I will point out one funny thing as I was putting these slides together, did a lot of AI imaging because, why not? It's an awesome tool. When I first said, give me a picture of an evil dictator pushing the nuclear red button, honestly, the picture it gave me was a picture of Trump in a red jacket. I got a click out of that. And so I was like, no, not a real person. So then we got this guy here. But anyways, so, wargaming, it's an effective way to train for this operating in the face of a limited nuclear attack. It's a great way to practice it, practice what we've learned, right? Or will learn, and just prepare for this, right? A lot of what's going to happen after a nuclear detonation is not so much what do I do tactically on the ground if I'm, the sister unit that just got nuked. There is a bit of Kazovac. How do I continue to operate? What's the dangers? What's the hazards? But it's really going to be more at those higher levels of command of what do we do now? How do we change our battle plans? How do we adjust? How do we deal with this actual mass casualty event of hundreds of people with severe burns and radiation sickness? How do we handle this? Which is very different than any other kind of, effect that we're going to see on a battlefield. And if we don't wargame it, and as we all as wargamers on here know, wargaming is about, getting humans to make decisions, right? So letting them practice those decisions when, oh, I messed up and I put all the little counters into the fallout area. I shouldn't do that. They learn next time I won't do that. I need to move my people out of the way. So that's a great way to do it where lives aren't on the line. And we're not doing any more nuclear testing. So it's really the only way to do it, right? Some kind of wargamer simulation. Um, so wargaming, we have adversaries and nuclear weapons. We see that's a threat. We see that's actually a real threat, and they have a lot of nuclear weapons out there. Why aren't we doing more of this? We know the National Defense Strategy in 2022 said do this. It actually said it in 2018 as well, but they said do this, practice this. Why aren't we doing this more? Well, I spent 4 years at DTRA trying to get this off the ground and try to advocate like do this, do this, do this. Played in probably over 30 games across the Department of Defense and NATO and allies. So what did I kind of see in that time, and why isn't it more common? So really, most war games that do go nuclear that don't index right away, typically it's a way, like we said earlier, way to just end the war game. Oh, nuke happens, game over. Let's all go home, right? If they do go nuclear and play through the nuclear event, it is traditionally focused on those high yield strategic exchange, kind of mutually assured destruction, Stratcom versus the Russians, and let's just shoot all of our ICBMs at each other, and so you can take each other out more, right? And that eliminates the tactical conflict, right? Wargamers that are trying to look at a battle plan, right? If you're trying to wargame an O plan or certain battle, strategy, if you're going to go nuclear and then do this, from like war games, I'm going to nuke everything and, wipe both these countries off the map, which actually wouldn't happen. But, people think like, well, I'm just going to ruin all my tactical battle plan because it basically ends, right? As soon as a nuke starts flying, then we stop and hand it over to Stratcom, and Stratcom goes and nukes them, nukes China off the face of the earth. And then we all go home. Like that's not what happens. So people are scared that that's what's going to happen. So they don't want to do that because they're going to lose all their learning and all of their, their goals of their war game by going nuclear. And that's not the case if you're going to do it correctly in a limited fashion. Also, if you're going to do nuclear weapons, right, you need subject matter expertise, right, to help design the war game so that you do it correct. You have an accurate, realistic nuclear weapon, and that you do have effects that are realistic. And that's not something that exists. And in fact, I would say from my time interacting with many, many people at all levels, from lower NCOs all the way up to multi-star generals, right, and admirals, there is a severe lack of even the basic nuclear knowledge. I have heard so many generals make statements that just dumbfounded me. In fact, I had a 3-star once tell me he would see it as an unlawful order to send troops into an area contaminated with fallout. However, he would have no issues ordering them into a area contaminated with VX, which to me is it blows my mind. Like it's the complete opposite. Like VX is so much more of a hazard, so much more dangerous than fallout. I mean, as a guy with a PhD in fallout, like I'm not worried. I'm honestly not that worried about fallout. Period. So it just blew my mind, and I'm not the only one that heard this. Like multiple people from the national labs heard this, and we were all like, "Oh my goodness, that's just idiotic almost." And if you do have a war game that you are able to kind of design it and have the nuclear effects and not go too high yield and destroy the world, right? You need experts to interpret the results of the war game states. So you need to translate the science of the nuclear weapon environments, how many PSI from the air blast, or how many centigrades of radiation, or how many calories per centimeter squared of thermal impulse, to something that makes sense to like, does that kill my tanks? What does that do to the people? How long, if they're exposed to, a certain amount of radiation, how long till they see effects so I can, degrade them eventually? Or how quickly are, how will they recover from that? What do I need to do that? You need someone that's smart on nuclear effects to be able to translate the science into actually the effects and the adjudication. And then kind of with that, right? War game effects require mission capabilities. So most of our nuclear codes are designed for targeting, and so they produce a result like you see here on the screen. A greater than a 10% probability of having 50% probability of moderate type 2 damage. Now, if I tell that to a tank commander, a company commander tank, say, hey, this just happened to your tank company of, was that 14 tanks? He's going to look at me and go, what does that even mean? And I'm going to tell him, I don't really even know either. Right. So you need to have a way to take that science and break it down. And so you can actually adjudicate an war game and say, hey, it's a war game. I don't need to know the exact orientation to model the aerodynamic effects of the blast wave over the tank. I just need to say, hey, I've got so many tanks, this probability. It's a dice roll, right? Based on the probability, you've lost 2 of your 14 tanks or 4 of your 14 tanks, and then play through the war game. But too many, nuclear effects SMEs will want to know down to like, what is the orientation of the driver's hatch? Is it open, closed? How much to really model like a full 3D model and take hours or days to run a model to give you results as opposed to, a quick dice roll in a war game. And I mean, honestly, of all of this all boils down to the lack of nuclear weapon effect knowledge is preventing DoD from examining real scenarios and kind of keeping us in that it's just game over, man. So what's happened to our nuclear IQ? We used to have a lot of smart people. We used to know a lot about this during the Cold War. And honestly, like the threat faded with at the end of the Cold War. We had people that were trained back in the, 70s and 80s that knew what to do and knew how to. We had nuclear artillery. We had the Davy Crockett, which is the coolest nuclear weapon of all time. It shot two miles was the max range of this. It was like 10 tons or up to 20 tons. It's awesome. It's my favorite nuclear weapon of all time. Super short range, but they used it and they knew they would survive. They weren't scared, right? And if you think about it, most of our only the most senior leaders in the military in uniform were around during the Cold War. It's been 30 years in 2019, and most military careers end shorter than 30 years. So we don't have a lot of people still serving in uniform that have that experience from the Cold War. So we've just lost it because we haven't trained it. We didn't have a nuclear threat, so we kind of forgot about it and kind of said, this isn't important. We have other important things to train about, right? Same thing. It used to be if you were in the military and joined like I did in the early 2000s, it was NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical for WMD. And then they switched it during the War on Terror to CBRN, and then they added an E. Luckily, they took the high explosives off because that was kind of ridiculous. That's not mass destruction. But CBRN is Chem Bio Rad Nuke. And, it prioritized the Chem Bio because that was the threat during the War on Terror, right? Nuclear wasn't really a threat from Iraq, Afghanistan, but chem, bio definitely was. And, to that point, a couple years ago, or, within a year since I left DTRA, right, we would work with the chem school, and they had less than a week of training for their like new officers on nuclear. It was basically like a couple days on how to estimate the size of a blast from holding your hand up to the mushroom cloud and knowing your distance and estimating the yield and mapping a fallout plot. That was it. They didn't really get much training on this because it was so much chem and bio. And most Army units, everyone I've talked to in the Army, they don't use their radiation meters. They've never used them because they keep them locked up in the arms room because they're one of the most expensive pieces of equipment that company commander has, and he doesn't want to lose that and have to pay for it. So they don't even use it. So the batteries are all dead and like rotted out. So they're not ready, and it's not something we train on anymore. And I think the biggest problem here is that Hollywood and the media have completely misled us on the extent of nuclear weapon effects. So the knowledge of our people in military is just flat out wrong when you ask them what happens with a nuclear weapon. This is kind of like my thing, like nuclear effects. I've got a video I'll give you a link to at the end. Like I'm known around the community when I used to do war games as, oh, it's the nukes aren't that bad guy. And that is kind of my mantra. Low yield nukes, and we're talking like 100 kilotons and less, really aren't as bad as you think. So this is a chance for me to take a teachable moment, since I have a somewhat captive audience, to talk a little bit about nuclear effects, because I'm assuming a lot of you don't know that much. So we're going to take a quick break and say, just look at a very quick examination. I could talk for hours on this. I'm going to try to be super quick. So what happens when a nuclear bomb goes off? Well, here we go. First off, and I'm going to relate everything pretty much in my talk to Hiroshima, just because it's an unclassified weapon that I can talk about. I can't talk about modern stuff because that would definitely be classified. So we're going to keep this thing unclassified. So when a nuclear weapon goes off, you get a cool mushroom cloud, right? You get a fireball that for Hiroshima, which is about 15 kilotons, the radius of the fireball is 180 meters. So this fireball lasts for a second or two, depending on the size. Might be longer for a bigger weapon. It is 100,000 degrees, whatever temperature scale you want to use at that level. They all kind of are the same. So Kelvin's, Celsius, Fahrenheit, whatever, 100,000 degrees. So you're thinking like basically the center of the sun. It's almost that hot. So it vaporizes everything, but basically turns them in not from atoms or molecules, basically into like ions and nuclei. So electrons and nuclei. So that's really hot, pretty crazy. You also get thermal radiation coming out instantaneously. This is from the X-rays coming off, the high energy X-rays coming off the fission, hit the air, interact with the air, and produce a giant thermal pulse that goes out in all directions at the speed of light, burning things, catching some things on fire. If you're looking at the blast when it goes off, you'll get a retinal burn, potentially permanent if you're looking exactly at that fireball when it detonates in that 1 second. Like a sunspot, it's not like you're be completely blind, but if you ever as a kid like went and stared at the sun for a little while and you would look away and blink and you still see that little outline of the sun in it would be like that forever, but it wouldn't be like completely blind. You're gonna get skin burns. Might set off fires pretty bad. And so for Hiroshima, that was out to about 1.9 kilometers, where you could get a third-degree burn on your exposed skin. Also, at the speed of light, instantaneous at the detonation, is the prompt radiation. So you're going to get high energy gamma rays and neutrons coming off of the blast from the fission, and they will go out instantaneously, travel through a lot further than the thermal pulse. So the thermal pulse, just light, so it'll be stopped by anything opaque between you and the blast. The radiation will go through most things except for like thick concrete buildings, thick steel, or the ground. And so you get prompt radiation coming through that can mess you up. Problem is those effects don't hit you right away. They usually take a while a while for them to show. So typically you'll die from the other things and maybe the radiation later. This can also produce fallout, which I have a little bit of talk about because I always have to talk about fallout. But not all weapons produce fallout. That's a talk for another day. But you can see at the bottom, Hiroshima, that was out to about 1.2 kilometers. So you could potentially die within a month if you don't get any antibiotics because the radiation kills your white blood cells. So you die from infection, not actually from the radiation effects. And a little bit after that, because it's not a light wave, it's a compression wave or a sound wave. It's the air blast is your traditional blast from any explosion, a shock wave coming out. Just a lot more powerful than a normal explosion for the most part. So this only goes out to about a little over a kilometer to, damage concrete buildings. So that's kind of the main things that happen when a nuclear weapon goes off. You also have EMP. I'm not going to talk about EMP today. I will say this is probably the most overestimated and misunderstood effect. There always is an EMP, even when you're near the surface. However, the EMP is inside of all of these other things. So if your radio gets turned off, you're also on fire. You've got enough radiation to die, and probably within like a couple of days, like that much radiation, and your vehicle is crunched. So who cares if your radio doesn't work? You're already dead. In multiple ways. But you also gonna have an EMP if you have a burst up in the atmosphere. Not going to go there, but that's us from some recent studies I've seen from the national labs, not as bad as people think it is, or at least used to think it was. All right, so I just want to cut to two real quick misconceptions that show why it's important to do nuclear wargaming and remove these misconceptions with your warfighters. So I don't have a modern nuclear blast in a city, but what I do have is the 2020 explosion from Beirut, if you all remember that. It was during COVID. Again, not nuclear, but it's estimated to be about a kiloton worth of explosive damage. That's how big it was. Pretty huge. Here's a picture of it from the aftermath. It was ammonium nitrate fertilizer stored incorrectly in a warehouse for a long time. And so on the top right over here, you'll see the before picture, and the bottom right, you'll see the after with the crater, and you can see it here. So what I want to point out is you look at this, you see a lot of destruction nearby, but most of the rest of the city is just fine. And if you look, you see this set of grain silos actually right next to that crater. That was there when the blast happened, and it's still kind of there. Right now, grain silos are not super reinforced concrete. They are made to withstand an explosion from the dust built up in the grain, which can happen. It used to happen, I guess, a lot in farms. But you can see there, those are still somewhat there. And then if you actually kind of trace back from the area of the blast, you can see behind those grain silos a lot less damage. It's a lot cleaner. And that's because it's shielded the blast, that blast wave. Now, again, this is not nuclear, so you don't have the thermal pulse that would set some things on fire and burn some things, and you definitely don't have the radiation coming off. But the blast is comparable to a nuclear blast. So you'll see a lot of stuff kind of north, a lot of crushed steel warehouses that are, a steel frame and, aluminum sides or maybe a light steel frame, easy to knock down. Right? Those are all destroyed, but the buildings are just fine. And in fact, everything behind that grain silo survived. So if you have a nuclear blast in a modern day city, it's going to destroy stuff right near the blast. You're going to have some damaged buildings, probably not leveled, but damaged buildings. But then it's going to quickly dissipate the damage. You're not just going to wipe out an entire city. Not at all. Now, just to compare that, right? One of the common misconceptions we have is, I hear all the time, well, Hiroshima, we leveled that city, or Nagasaki, we leveled that city. Why wouldn't we level a city now? Well, so kind of, it's not exactly apples to apples here, a 1 kiloton in Beirut to a 15 kiloton in Hiroshima. But it's just interesting to me, first off, to point out that if you look at Beirut, it's 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate that caused that damage. And then Hiroshima was 64 kilograms of uranium. So this, that's roughly the size of a basketball compared to, a whole warehouse full of ammonium. The nuclear weapons are scientifically awesome that we were able to design this, right? Terrible weapons of war. I hope we never use them again, actually, right? Like, I'm not advocating at all. I'm not like a nuke monger, like, let's nuke everyone. I hope we never use them, right? But we need to prepare for if they're used. But scientifically, I think they're pretty impressive. But I do want to point out in this picture from Hiroshima, right? If you look, you still see a bunch of buildings still there. And then you can see the big one that's right here in the foreground of the image. And that just goes to show that pre-World War II Hiroshima, right, and during World War II, they built most of their buildings in that time in Japan were made of wood, paper walls, and glue to hold it all together. That does not withstand a blast very easily, right? It's not, they weren't reinforced concrete buildings. They were just paper and wood, 1 or 2 story buildings. They got knocked over. And then I have knocked over wood and paper, exposed gas from the natural gas lines, going into the houses, and exposed wires from electricity. That's just a disaster waiting to happen, right? That's a fires that happened after the fact, not from the bomb itself. So really the point here is, you can't really compare Hiroshima, because we don't build cities that way, to a modern day city. It's not going to nearly be that level of destruction in a modern day city. And another side, I don't have it here, but in Nagasaki there was 5 earthquake reinforced concrete steel buildings, all 5 still standing and relatively unaffected from the blast. Just some walls kind of on the outside wall, but still structurally sound. So not going to destroy a modern day city that's built for that kind of, just for earthquakes, and other natural disasters. So now I want to jump real quick and just talk about Fallout. So here's a slide I made many, many years ago when we weren't allowed to show any Fallout modeling at an unclassified level. So I kind of mocked it up and it's kind of stuck with us for a while. So what this is showing is if a nuclear blast, this is for a 10 kiloton blast, so roughly the size of Hiroshima. If a nuclear blast happened and you stood outside for 48 hours in the open, no shielding, not in a building, just like standing outside, what would your total accumulated radiation dose be? So you can see the kind of the legend up at the top. So blue is 25 centigrade. That's the civilian life-saving limit for first responders in the U.S. If they get more than that, they have to turn back. 75 is by doctrine the combat negligible risk. So that's where we, like, honestly, until 75, the military, at least during the Cold War, didn't track. They're like, oh, you're good. Get more radiation. You haven't hit a worry point yet. At 125 is the combat emergency risk. You weren't supposed to send your troops in if they've had 125 or more at that point by Cold War doctrine. And then 410 is that level where 50% of the population could die from infections because they lost their white blood cells if they don't get any kind of medical treatment within a month. So that's kind of what you can see there. It spans 55, almost about 50 kilometers. Pretty big area, right? That's pretty significant. That's 48 hours standing in place. But if you're looking at a military kind of operation where if I'm in that blast, I'm going to get out of there. And that's not immediate. That's deposited over a couple hours time frame. So I have time to, if blast happens and I'm not dead, I have time to kind of like, I always make the joke, you can't see me, but lick my finger, hold it up, figure out which way the wind's blowing, and get out of downwind. I have time. And if I'm in a vehicle, I can really have no problem, right? But if I have to then show up later to this area that's been nuked, right? And like, oh, I can never go there, right? It's radiation. If I actually go back, this is showing the same type of plot, but showing if I show up 12 hours after the detonation, and then I stand around in the open for 8 hours. Here's what the fallout would look like. Here's the radiation hazard. It's small. That fits in that black box in the larger picture. So you can see the threat has drastically reduced after 12 hours. And that's just due to the nature of radioactive decay, the fission products from the uranium and plutonium. It goes away really fast. Or at least the really bad stuff goes away pretty quickly. Here's a plot, 24 hours. So show up 24 hours after detonation and stand around for 8 hours. I can't even get a lethal dose in that 8 hours anymore. And then if I wait 48 hours, I mean, look, it's tiny. It's like 2.5 kilometers across and like less than a kilometer north and south. And that's pretty tiny. So the threat is really bad if you stand still in the open. And then most of that really bad stuff on the top is due to that initial exposure in the first like 6 hours. After that, the radiation is decaying very rapidly. So going in is okay. Now, again, if I were to plot something smaller than, 25 centigrade and I plotted like the, background radiation is about 0.3 centigrade, right? That would be a huge area and that would be there for, 10-ish years is what we kind of estimate from some modeling we've done. About 10 years before you're back down to about background radiation levels. A background's worth of radiation on top, is what you're going to get. It's about 10 years. So it's going to be a while before you could go back in there. But the actual threat of like getting sick and being combat effective goes away almost instantly. Well, not instantly, within a couple days. And then, the big one is always Chernobyl. You still can't go to Chernobyl. Well, you can go to Chernobyl. It's just not recommended. But what I've got here is a plot on the left. This is the exclusion zone of Chernobyl, and it's a heat map of the cesium-137 isotope, which is one of the fission products. About 6% of the products of the fission of uranium results at cesium-137, which has a half-life of about 30 years. That's going to be around for a long time. Right on the right is a model we did over the Anderson Air Base at Guam for a 30 kiloton. And you can see in top left is 1 hour after, 12 hours, 24, and 48 hours. And I'm pointing out the largest dose in our dose plot there. So you can see how quickly it goes away. And I will point out, right, for Chernobyl to kind of apples to apples this as much as you can. It was 192 tons of uranium that was mostly unfissioned that was ejected from that reactor explosion. It wasn't a nuclear bomb explosion. It was a steam explosion that ejected the nuclear fuel, mostly unfissioned uranium. That's going to be around for a long time. So 6% of that makes one is 11,520 kilograms of cesium-137 spread everywhere. That's a lot, and that's going to be around for a long time. If I look at a modern day nuclear weapon, again, I'm using Fat Man Hiroshima's bomb because it's unclassified. That was 6.2 kilograms. That 6% of that is 0.37 kilograms. That is not very much cesium-137 that I'm going to spread all over the place. It is going to be a lot less. So yes, there would still be some that would be radioactive, some small areas that would have like, a blip on a couple atoms of cesium-137 after a nuclear blast for a long time, right? That would set off a Geiger counter, but it's not a large amount like you have in Chernobyl that's still radioactive and still causing somewhat of a problem. So you can't really say, hey, Chernobyl, we can't ever go there. Like, no. Fallout is not as bad as what happened in Chernobyl because I'm splitting the uranium or plutonium. I'm not just ejecting it and a lot more of it, right? It's a lot less. Okay, so that was fun for me, hopefully for you. So now let's get back to the wargaming, right? So, okay, so you want to run a nuclear war game. I've convinced you. I need to put nuclear in every war game I do from now on. How do I do it? You don't have a PhD in nuclear engineering. What tools are there to help you adjudicate effects? I'm right now teaching at the National Defense University. I don't get to do any nuclear wargaming right now. Unfortunately, I actually have gotten a couple calls, but what do I do, right? Or what do you do? So I'm going to give you a couple tools right now that are available to you potentially. Some of them maybe not, some of them yes. So the Mind software, the DTRA flipbook, DTRA's nuclear SMEs, and then Nukemap if you have nothing else. So first thing I want to talk about is what we call mines, the mission impacts of NBC events, software or mines. You see the cool logo there. You can see the web address there at the top of the screen. It is a DTRA developed CUI or critical unclassified information tool. So because it is a DTRA-based tool and it is using DTRA's nuclear effects codes, it is CUI and not unclassified. It's not available to the public. You do have to be on a DoD NIPR connection to access it. So if you don't work for the Department of Defense and don't have a computer that connects directly to a NIPR connection, you can't get on mines. I'm sorry. We tried. We could not. So this is a tool that I developed in my last job. This is a screenshot of it, and I've got some more coming up later, but it's a drag and drop functionality. So we took all of DTRA's super technical codes and made it all drag and drop. Super easy. You pick on a menu what yield you want, what height of burst. You put it on the map, and it does all the calculations for you. You can go anywhere in the world. It was a change we had right before I left. We got it cleared to go. It used to be only U.S., but now you can go anywhere you want to in the world, nuke anywhere. So you can build any scenario you want. It's got buildings, it's got ships, it's got aircraft, it's got ground vehicles, all with the vulnerabilities built in to give you that operational impact. So the image you see here on the right, you've got these different buildings, M and H for medium and heavy and light, L, and then the airplane pictures, and the little bar is the adjudication. Are they red, are they green, or are they yellow? And it does all that for you. You don't have to know, hey, you can pick the building, and now instead of just medium, heavy, and light, there's a bunch of building, like 30 different building types you can pick. So you pick the closest surrogate for what you have in your scenario, you put it in, you hit calculate, and within 5 minutes, it's got results for you and fallout and everything. You can see the yields that are available. We kind of went 1s and 3s to keep it from doing, it's just kind of like it's the way we got around it with math. Doing anything classified. Like, hey, we're just going to do this math of 1s and 3s all the way up to 3 megatons. And that way we're not using actual nuclear yields. Maybe some of those might match a warhead somewhere, but we're not like, if we picked numbers that kind of looked at random that were actual yields, that would be classified. DTRA's working this right now to integrate into a couple wargaming tools, Swift, Storm, as well as the Army's JLVC Joint Live Virtual Constructive Modeling Simulation Federation. They're working to be the nuclear adjudicator for all those tools. And if you want some information, you can see his name, Major Andrew Bull. He's my replacement. He's there at DTRA now. There's his email. Shoot him an email. He can help you get on mines. Or if you have a DoD NIPR connection, go to that address, and it will say you don't have an account. Click here to register one. You can go through the process, or just hit him up. So that's a great tool. If you have computers and want to build something really cool, it's great. I like it because I built it. I helped build it, but great. If you don't have it, here's another option. So this is what we call the DTRA's Nuclear Effects Flipbook. This is basically a set of lookup tables that were derived from a bunch of mines runs. So we ran mines, we got all the results, we put them in tables, and then we got them cleared for public release. So this is public releasable. If you want this, shoot me an email after this. I'll have my emails at the end. I will send it to you. I have it on PDF. We also have like some really cool, like, I don't have them anymore, but DTRA does like bound ones with little tabs on them. But it has sections on unit combat effectiveness, blast damage, impacts of different things, air base impacts, civilian casualties, and fallout. And again, for all of those 1s and 3s that I mentioned before. So we just did a whole bunch of mines runs and calculated, capture all the stuff. So to show you what it looks like, here's this snippet for basically a 30 kiloton ground burst for all of them. So you can see in the top left is kind of that unit impacts. So, starting at the top, that's an armored battalion. And we only did everything as battalions because it's a pretty good estimate for percentage wise. What's the, so you can look at, what's the percent of people killed for the battalion. And then if you want to scale it up to a larger unit or scale it down, it's a pretty good approximation. We did it for different from platoons, companies, battalions, but brigades, and we found this is pretty accurate just to use this. And again, this is for just a flip book, so we're just kind of giving you some quick adjudication tips. So what you'll see there is kind of the legends might be too small, but the center ring is the vehicles assigned, and like if it's green, it survived. It's black, it's dead. The middle ring is the crew, and then the outer ring is the other assigned personnel that we treat as in the open. So why, people that are exposed. And you can see, and then the box gives you the effectiveness, the percentage of the unit that's affected by doctrine, whether that's 85, 70, 85, 50 to 70, less than 50 or less than 10. So it's just a quick way, a visual way to say, hey, what are my numbers? What are my percentages? Boom. And I can play my game. So at different distances out. And after 2 kilometers, everyone survived. So we didn't do anything. On the top right, that's the blast distance impact. So this is your vehicles, nothing to do with people. So you've got a couple building types, you've got some ground vehicles, you've got some ships, some maritime stuff, and some aircraft. So you can kind of see, very similar kind of idea of, what's the probability they will get severe damage or moderate damage. So again, we couldn't do everything. We're trying to make these a small set of lookup tables that fits in like your cargo pocket for the military people. So we're trying to make it quick and short. Bottom left is the airbase impact. So for a average medium-sized airbase, and you can see we have fighters in the middle columns are bombers, and then hardened aircraft shelters. And it's like based on the yield, what percentage will I get? So for a 3 kiloton ground bombers on the ground, or sorry, ground burst on bombers that are like parked bombers, I'm going to get 75% of them with a 3 kiloton. To get up to 100%, I need a 10 kiloton. That's kind of how you read this chart. And then on the far right is your civilian casualties estimate for just the average population of a small city, a medium city, and a large city. So those are those tables. Again, quick lookup tables. We have these for all the yields for ground burst and a fallout free like air burst, which the tables are slightly different for those. And then we have the fallout section. This is my like pride and joy because I figured this out. But what this shows is, again, for different yields, we have a 5 mile an hour wind and a 10 mile an hour wind, kind of like looking downwind. And you kind of see, so basically the way you read this table is you find your distance from ground zero across the top. So in this case, 2,000 meters. What hour after detonation do you enter the fallout field? So we'll say we'll show up 6 hours later, and you read down and you say, hey, I get 275 is my dose rate for those 2 hours. And then if I, leave after 4 hours, so say I stay doing my mission for 4 hours, I have to add those up. So just in case, you can't do that in your head, 275 plus 183 gives you 458. And then you read down here at the bottom and say, hey, I'm in the 450 category. That's res category 3 in dark red. I've got people that are going to have illness, being throwing up, and they're going to be weak in 6 to 12 hours. 75% will be nausea, vomiting in 6 hours. Everyone's going to have to go to the hospital. 50% will die within 30 days if I don't get them antibiotics. So that's how you read this chart, and you can see how quickly the colors go from dark black in the top left corner to, as I spread out further away or time down, how quickly it goes gray. And so that's the way this chart, and we have these charts for all of them. So it's a quick way to say, hey, here's my fallout, here's my units, what's their dose rate, what are their effects, and then you can kind of adjudicate in the war game from there. And then last but not least, this option, I'm not to be honest with you, when I first started my last job, we didn't have these great tools that I just showed you. We didn't have anything. So it was a lot of like doing calculations by hand, looking them up in Glassone and Dolan's nuclear weapon effects book, which is kind of the Bible of nuclear weapon effects, if you will. Or running out to your car, pulling up Nukemap on your phone and plotting it and seeing what the results were, writing down the distances, and then going back in and adjudicating. So this was developed by a guy named Alex Wellerstein, I think back in like 2012 when we first did it. He basically took all of the tables and formulas in Glassone and Dolan's nuclear weapon effects and put them into a graphical tool. Honestly, you can see the website there. If you don't know about Nukemap, just Google Nukemap. It'll be the first thing comes up, Alex Wellerstein. You can pick your yield. You can either drag it on the map anywhere you want, type in a city, has a bunch of drop downs. You can choose your yields. It's got a bunch of options. It even has a Davy Crockett, which is awesome. And then you can tell it what you want to calculate, and it will calculate the science. So it'll tell you the amount of thermal energy or, roughly 3rd-degree burns. And then you'll have to kind of overlay that distance on your map. So it's a little bit more work, but this is an option if you have it. Again, I've used it a couple times in a pinch. It's not great. It's not as accurate as those other tools, but it's okay. It'll work if you have nothing else. But I do caution, like some of the stuff on here, like from a DTRA standpoint, was classified. Like they had some like actual weapon stuff. Like I don't know if you should be having it. Like we can't do anything about it. Like we as DTRA couldn't say that stuff in public or show that in public. But this is some other dude that did this. So whatever. All right. So real quick, just a couple examples of some recent nuclear war game. I'm going to fly through these real quick. Just some examples of games that I supported before we got cleared, presentations afterwards, so I can show these. Just to show like, hey, what have we done? What are the lessons that were learned? Why is nuclear wargaming important? Playing past the nuclear weapon. So this was a game we ran with the U.S. Navy, the Defense Nuclear Users Group, or the DNUG, back in September 21. So not super recent, but anyways, and this is just showing what I thought when I went to this game. It was the first like big war game with the Navy I ever played. This is what I thought the Navy looked like. And if you're in the Navy, you're gonna laugh at me, but I thought that's how they fought. Like I thought all the ships were basically right next to each other. I've seen the posters of America's Navy, so that's what I thought. Not the case at all, right? It's more like this. So you're looking at 9 or more nautical miles, which is like 14 or at least kilometers away. From what I've heard from the Navy people I've talked to, a lot of times you'll be the only ship you can see on the horizon in your group, right? There'll be other ships that you're in your carrier strike group, for instance, that I've got modeled up here, and you won't even see them. They're over the horizon, which blew my mind, but that's how they work. And I guess it makes sense, but okay, cool. So a lot of times in war games, right, if you're playing, a battle in the Pacific, right, to see the whole Pacific map, you've got to be at a scale of like your hexes on the map, or your cells on your map, or 70 nautical miles across or whatever. So a carrier strike group is a single, you're not modeling every ship, you're modeling a block for the, or a counter for the entire carrier strike group of, carrier, in this case, 3 destroyers and 2 cruisers. And so if a nuke hits one of them in the war games I've seen, they're like, oh, take that whole carrier strike group off the map. They all just got nuked off the face of the earth. That is not the case. So we're showing that here, and this was a kind of a point to show the Navy, right? So I'm going to model an airburst 1 megaton. And so you want to do an airburst because if you bring the nuclear weapon up off the ground, you actually get the effects reach a little further. So if I put that nuke basically right over the carrier, and I'm kind of plotting out these rings here, and I'll show you what they mean. You're going to see that all the other ships are adjudicated by the mines tool as green, and they're fine. And you can see, I get a little bit of the 8 calorie centimeter squared, that outer ring kind of, it almost overlaps the icon of that, kind of upper left destroyer, and that's 3rd degree burns on exposed skin. But if a missile's coming in, I think the normal, TTP is like get inside, right? Missiles coming, incoming, get inside. If you're inside, the thermal's not going to get you. If you're inside a ship, the metal of the ship blocks that real easily, so you're fine. So these people are going to have basically no effects, right? All the lethal stuff is really close and on that ship. Now, that carrier is basically sunk. It's done for. Everyone on there is probably dead, right? Which is 5,000 people. That's a terrible, terrible tragedy, right? But the rest of the ships are just fine. So wiping that whole carrier strike group off the map, you're throwing away a lot of fighting power, right? A lot of your combat power still. Like, yes, you lost your carrier, which is the point of the carrier strike group, but you still got, in this case, three destroyers and 2 cruisers that can still contribute to the fight. So what were some of the lessons learned from that operation, right? A single weapon, even a megaton, can't take out more than 1 ship. And that's not just something we learned. Like the DIA has done some modeling, same thing. So this, if you've ever seen American Assassin 2017 movie, they have a nuke that goes off in the water, and like there's all these ships like America's Navy all next to each other, and they all get sunk. Never would happen. Like that's total BS. So how would a carrier strike group continue to operate without a carrier? That was something they had to think about, because a lot of the carrier is kind of the hub of the carrier strike group. So a lot of the comms go to the carrier and then get routed out and makes decisions. So what happens if you lose your commander? What happens if you lose it? What do you do? Does it just become something else that you take, not a carrier strike group anymore, just a strike group, and go send them off? Do you piecemeal them off to other people? They still exist. So that was a challenge that was like, we've got to figure out what to do. What kind of casualties would they face? It's mostly going to be, as you saw, the burns, right? And burns is not something that we are typically trained to deal with, especially not your like line level medics and corpsmen don't know how to deal with severe burns. So, and a lot, like hundreds of severe burns. So definitely something to think about, right? And then this is just a kind of a trivia question here, that fallout formed over water is not called fallout, it's called rainout, because it doesn't fall out of the sky because of gravity, it rains out of the sky. So that's just a little tidbit. But again, once that rainout or fallout hits the water, it sinks, it disperses, and basically within an hour, the modeling shows it is basically gone. It is not a hazard anymore. So even those plots, if you think back to the Guam plot, and I'll show it again in a minute, I erased it over the water because it hits the water and it sinks and spreads out, and then it's not radiating you anymore on the surface. So it's basically gone. So, the comment was like, well, a nuke happened, we can't drive through that area, or sail through that area anymore. And like, no, you totally could. It'd be just fine because it's going to hit the ground, hit the water and sink. So another quick example, this is an air base, looking at Guam Air Base again. This is something we did for the Air Force, for their future game. We ran a workshop for them, like think about nuclear weapons before the game. So this is a 30 kiloton ground burst at the Guam Air Base, directly on the flight line there. So this is just kind of, the top left is the blast, the top right is the radiation, the bottom is the thermal pulse. And you can see, if you're not familiar with Guam, which a lot of people aren't, the air blast effects, the severe air blast effects, even the ones, the gray ring here that would knock over a residential structure, are confined to the airfield itself. So the civilian population that lives on the base here, like the families, are out here. Their houses are going to be just fine. The glass might break, but the house is going to be just fine. The same with the radiation, the really lethal radiation. In fact, most of the radiation, the civilian first responder limit doesn't even get to the on-base housing. The thermal is a different story. The on-base housing is like right here. In that one, it's just south of the fuel dumps, is right here, the fuel point. So you're going to have some thermal effects into this, but in this case, if you're inside, people are going to be fine. And I see a point from Jesse. I just saw the chat pop up on my other window. What about, the topography? Yes, Guam is hilly. And no, these models don't, right? We want them to be fast running. We want answers in minutes time scale, not hours or days. And to run a full physics code using the topography, having to have that terrain data, right, to however many meter resolution, it's going to require a supercomputer in a long time. We've done some modeling. I don't have it at the unclassified level to show, but honestly, the only one that doesn't look almost like a circle like you're seeing here is the air blast, because it's going to be shielded by every building it hits, or everything it hits. So otherwise, like, the radiation is going to go right through most stuff. It's basically round. Same with the thermal. It's really only the air blast that's going to not look round, but it's still mostly round. It's just going to be like you have little spikes that are, into the ring where it's kind of shielded. So great question. So here's that fallout plot again, showing you, the same one I had earlier when I compared to Chernobyl. Top left, 1 hour, 12 hours in the top right, bottom right, 24, bottom left, 48. And you can see I erased it over the water because, again, when it hits the water, so that first hour is kind of the deposit you're going to get in that first hour. And a lot of that you see is over water. And it does get over here, which is the civilian airfield and the civilian hospital. And then there's a Navy base down here. So you're getting fallout, you're getting some radiation, but low levels of radiation. And then after an hour, or after 12 hours, this is the plot that doesn't actually go over those. So you're not even getting even 5 actually, I think 1 is the plot on here. So you're not even getting most of that level of radiation. Still, you're having less than a centigrade radiation. Very small chance of it even doing anything to you over time. But, you would have a little bit of radiation potentially set off like a Geiger counter or something, but not a health risk at these like civilian populations. This is kind of the worst weather in Guam too. Like, most of the time it blows actually like northeast off the island into the water, not back onto the island from the airfield. And then, so what are their lessons learned, right? A single nuclear detonation doesn't destroy the whole airfield. There was still some stuff that survived. Some of the fuel that was buried would survive in those hardened aircraft shelter or hardened ammunition storage bunkers in the north of the airfield actually survived that blast. So you could go and recover it, right? You wouldn't do it right away. You got to wait and let that radiation die down some, but you could go back in or come from north, land up north. There's an airfield north, and come down, or come from the south and kind of skirt the fallout and get in there and get what you need and get out. Recover that fuel, recover those, that ammunition, those, missiles or whatever you might really need that are stored there. Go get them quickly and get out. Wear some, protection, and you're not going to have a significant, it's not like something you can never go there or have to wait years to go there. You can go right in, 12 hours later and get that stuff out. And, once the nuclear effects, they realize like, oh, hey, we could actually go back in there and get that stuff. We could probably, after a week or two, maybe start flying planes back in there, landing, getting that stuff and getting out of there. If we could wait, like, the longer we can wait, the better, but we don't have to wait, years. We can go back in days to weeks later. And then Fallout isn't a long-term effect for military things, right? Like the video game Fallout, or the awesome show that was on Amazon, right? that's totally bonkers and wrong. Like, no, fallout is not gonna, number one, turn you into a mutant. It's gonna kill you, and it's not gonna be there hundreds of years later, still there. Like, no, the ground wouldn't be radioactive in that scenario, but whatever. Okay, last one I want to get to. This is a event we supported for NATO's Joint Forces Command. Sorry, Joint Forces Command Naples. They did a senior leader seminar with all their generals and admirals, and Game gave a talk. And so they were looking at, well, what about, looking at, what if the adversary, you can guess who it probably was, used a nuclear weapon, a loyal tactical nuclear weapon against us. So this is kind of the scenario we had. You've got, a U.S. unit moving up the center to attack some bad guys. This is kind of zoomed in. So it's two striker battalions and an armor brigade. You can see the spacing we used. Again, if you're not a military person, an army person, this probably doesn't mean anything to you. That's fine. Doesn't need to. We got them spaced out accurately, about 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers apart. So what we did is we looked at a 1 kiloton, a 0.1 kiloton, and a 10 kiloton, just to kind of see, like, what's the range of effects. Here's the adjudication, and in fact, that 1 kiloton in the kind of the leftmost one. And actually, we did the model. We put it in the center, not over one, just to kind of show. But you can see that 1 kiloton here kind of turns these guys yellow, somewhat degraded. The 0.1 kiloton only takes out the company it's on, and then this takes out this tank company. Now, we only modeled to the company level. We didn't actually, in a company's 14 vehicles, so the chance of taking out all 14 tanks, is bad. We were just modeling that tank company as a single point on the ground at the time. This was an older version of mine that didn't have the ability to go to the individual vehicle level, which it does now. So here's just the air blast environment. You can see, 50, the purple is required to kill a tank. So you can't even see it in the 0.1 kiloton. You can see nothing touched the other two vehicles in the 1 kiloton on the left. And yeah, we definitely killed the tanks that were right there. Here's the thermal pulse. And then again, if you're in a vehicle buttoned up, the thermal won't do anything to you. You'll be protected. So that doesn't really matter unless you're exposed. So, hey, what should we do? We have incoming. Everyone get into cover, get in your vehicle and close the hatches, and you'll be fine from the thermal. And then here's the radiation effects. Again, it still, even for the 10 kiloton down here, doesn't even reach the bad stuff, the dark things, right? It's the yellow is where you could die if you don't get medical treatment. Doesn't even reach these other two tank companies for the biggest one we did. So really, you're not going to have a lot of effects. Like 3 nuclear weapons on a brigade took out, in this case, 2 companies. And I'm telling you, this is super conservative. It'd be a lot less than this. But you might lose a total of a company from this strike if we actually modeled each individual vehicle location. So definitely, you're not taking out, you're losing maybe a third, less. I say less than a third of that brigade. You're losing less than a third of your combat fighting force from 3 different nuclear weapons. Again, that's why I say they're not that bad. Most people would say, oh, 3 nuclear weapons, you wipe everyone, that whole brigade's gone. Not at all the case. So what did they learn? Well, warning and preparation and training is key to surviving that strike. Knowing incoming might be nuclear, get under cover, that's key. And then, getting in that vehicle, buttoning up. From what I remember when I was with a armor unit and a Bradley unit, right? Nobody ever buttoned up because it's hot and it's hard to see and hard to drive. So you always had the hatch open a little bit. You got to learn to keep that hatch closed, right? And that Indiana Jones scene from Crystal Skull, that's kind of depicted by this like doll that I found a picture of, right? Total BS. Like if he was that close to nuclear blast, even in a lead lined, he would die like so many ways. But yeah, whatever. Okay, so wrapping it up here in conclusion, right? If nuclear weapons are used in a conflict, most of the fighting force still has to continue that conventional fight. Think back to that brigade I just showed you, right? I lost a third. Those guys have to keep, kind of keep fighting the bad guys they were in contact with. They have to take care of their casualties. But those other brigades on their left and right that, we didn't look at, the ones in green, they have to keep fighting. They don't just get to quit and go home. It's not game over. They have to keep fighting. And they have to think, 1 nuke was used. What if another nuke happens on me? What do I do then? How do I change my tactics to make sure I'm more survivable, right? Showing the Navy ships, right? The way the Navy fights where they're so spread out actually is great. You want to be as spread out as you can in a nuclear, like potential nuclear environment, because then I'm not a lot of stuff close together, and it might take out one, but not everybody. So they have to know how to do. Education is the single greatest way and force multiplier for fighting on the nuclear battlefield. Teaching our soldiers, you are not going to die. Well, probably not die. Like if you are dead immediately, like the blast happens and you're not immediately dead, you are probably going to survive and be just fine. And that's something that people don't understand. They think, blast happened, I'm gonna die, radiation, and like, no, if you're not dead, you're probably just fine. And the best way to reinforce that, as we all know, is wargaming. Practicing it, letting you kind of play out what you learn and finding out, oh, that doesn't work. Oh, I'm still too close. I need to spread my people out, right? Oh, this was a terrible thing. We need to figure out a new way to do this because we are setting ourselves up for failure. That is key. So as I end, I've got two key takeaways, right? Some of you, this might be like brand new information to you, and you're like, I don't know if I believe him, or hopefully, you do believe me because I'm kind of an expert on this stuff. But this is nothing new, right? This is taken from the 50s. This is from the New York Civil Defense, right? If an atom bomb drops, we will not all be killed. And this is exactly what I just told you, right? Everybody close is definitely dead. As you start moving out, it's less and less people. And at the far end, right, everyone should decide that one dead guy like had a heart attack or something, right? Like, okay, not actually from the blast. So if you're close, yes, you're dead in multiple ways. But if you're not dead immediately, you're probably going to survive. And then, right, if you don't know, right, if you see a bright nuclear flash from a nuclear explosion, by doctrine, you are supposed to get in the prone with your helmet facing the blast. Why? So their head disintegrates first, killing you faster. Funny joke. I found this a while ago. Still makes me laugh. No, you are supposed to do that so that your helmet will protect you from any shrapnel flying, and you're laying down so you don't get picked up and blown by the blast wave. So with that, I'm going to go to questions. So I'm going to leave this up here. So my two emails, my NDU email is the best way to reach me. So if you want that flip book, right, get my email, send me an email. I'll send it to you probably tomorrow. My Army email's there. I don't check that very often because I have to like log into like a virtual machine to get to it. It's a kind of a pain. So hit me up on NDU. There's a link to mines if you have NDU. I've got this article that just got published like a week ago at Joint Force Quarterly about nuclear effects and why the DoD needs to understand nuclear effects. It's pretty interesting. Go out. Here's how to get a digital copy of it. Just click on this link or just search Joint Force Quarterly. It's in the most recent, the January one. Like if you go to Joint Force Quarterly's website from NDU Press, you'll see a link to the newest one and you'll find it on there. And then I've got my Nuke 101 video with the QR code because I'm that much of a nerd, and our nuke weapon effect simulation videos. You can see the Nuke 101 video. It's been around for like 2-something years. It's got 36,000 views. It's unclassified. It's an hour of me talking nuclear weapon effects, all in detail, all of them to include EMP, which I know I didn't cover. And then the nuclear weapon effect simulation is like a 2.5-minute video of basically a mock-up, a simulation of a nuclear blast on tanks and strikers from 500 or I think it's like 500 meters, a kilometer, 2 kilometers, and 12 kilometers. So it just kind of shows you how survivable you are the further out you are. So with that, I'm going to leave this up and answer your questions.
Hey, Jim, thank you. That was really awesome. I learned a lot myself. I have a couple different questions and I'll try to bounce between them. So the first real question is, you addressed like sort of the technical aspect of using tactical or low yield nuclear weapons and how they're not so bad, as you put it, right? How do you consider like the human or non-technical aspects of using a nuclear weapon, right? Whether that's on morale, panic, on civilian populations, the movement of people on the battlefield, or like the morale of of troops who are near it, right? Like,
Yep.
how's that adjudicated or should
So
be?
that's not, yeah, so that's a great question. We get that question a lot, and that's something that, I mean, if someone ever could come up with a model of that, right, we would definitely use it somehow. I mean, psychological effects is going to be probably as I say, nukes aren't that bad. It's the psychological effects are going to outweigh any actual physical effects that happen by far. I mean, a nuke goes off, the entire population is, anywhere in that country, right? I mean, you have a nuke go off, let's say in DC, people in California are going to be claiming they're getting radiation exposure, right? On the other side of not even possible, they're going to say it, right? Like you're going to have so many, as we used to call it, worried well, people that are going to come to you saying, I know I got irradiated. I know I got this. And it's like, no, you're going to be fine. Right. But you're going to have to deal with that. Right. And if you're trying to, as I said, oh, just wait 12 hours and then drive through the fallout area, not a problem. But what about the civilian population that's trying to evacuate that area that you're now having, clogging up the roads? That is definitely an issue. And that's something that kind of I don't know how to adjudicate. There's no easy way to adjudicate that, right? I mean, psychological effects are definitely a concern, and I don't know of a good psychological model other than to say people are going to be freaked out.
No, that's you're right, spot on. So, how do the Russians of today envision nuclear war? Do they conceptualize tactical and strategic nuclear warfare as separate stages of war? The person says the last study he or she is aware of is from the 1990s Heinz interview with the former Soviet nuclear specialist. Do you have anything else more recent? And the same question for the Chinese. I'm not sure how much of this you can address, but I'll toss that
I'll
out.
do my best. I'll do my best. So one of the things that I mean, as you saw, I showed you a couple of things that are like public releasable, like that flip book. When I got that cleared at DTRA to be public releasable, people didn't believe me. They're like, I don't believe you. Like, but a couple of my friends in the national labs were like, dude, we would never be able to say that. Like, can't even mention we have that in public. How did you get that? I'm like, here's the clearance. It's good because it's just science. We're not doing really anything, right? And all the vehicles that were in the flip book, it's all based on old World War II equipment. So it's not an Abrams tank that we say tank. We're actually doing like a Sherman tank that we don't have in the inventory. So I'm not giving a vulnerability away. It's good enough surrogate for a war game, right? Wouldn't want to like model targeting off it, but it's pretty good. So I'm good at trying to take things that are classified and finding ways to talk about them unclassified. I don't have any specific studies I can tell you to say here's how the Russians think about it. I will say they don't make the distinction of like strategic and tactical like we do. So if you didn't know, the distinction between a strategic and a non-strategic weapon is the delivery system, and that's by the New START treaty. So it's how is it delivered, not the yield, not the size. It's basically so you could have a very small strategic weapon or a very big yield non-strategic weapon or tactical weapon. It's all about how it's delivered. So if it's delivered off a nuclear sub, if it's delivered off an ICBM, or if it's delivered off of a nuclear capable bomber like a B2, then it is a strategic weapon, regardless of the yield. That it's the delivery system. It's strategic versus not strategic. So the Russians, from my understanding, right, and I don't have like anything I'm like thinking of and trying to say like, well, I read this interview with Putin, some classified. I'm just saying, like from the war games I played in and my operational experience, it is they don't see a distinction as much as they just see it as another weapon in their quiver, if you will, right? Like to them, it is a more serious weapon than a conventional weapon. But I don't think they see it as much of the nuclear taboo as we do. And right, like we also, after the end of the Cold War, got rid of our tactical nuclear weapons for the most part, other than the few that we, whatever, less than 100 we have stationed, I think, over in, NATO, right? The NATO nuclear weapons. Everything else we have is strategic. We don't have, we at one point we had 30,000 nuclear weapons in the arm in the inventory, right? Those are the Davy Crockett, the atomic demolition ammunition, Nike rockets, all kinds of cool nuclear artillery, all kinds of really cool stuff that we had that was tactical nuclear weapons. And then we got rid of all that. The Russians still have a lot of that stuff. So to them, they also see it as kind of an advantage because they have a way to escalate that we can't match. Right? Like if they go tactical nuclear, we almost have to go strategic nuclear to counter, except for the NATO weapons. That's kind of why we keep those around. But like they kind of have like a way that we can't match them. And I would also argue, I think we got rid of them personally because conventional weapons got way, way better. Right? Like we used to have nuclear weapons that were megaton scale because we would miss by like 2 kilometers when we shot an ICBM across the world or dropped a bomb or dropped a bomb from on. We'd miss by a kilometer or two. So I'd have a really big boom on the other. I had megatons to make sure I hit my target. Now our target location area, right, like a Hellfire, like in Iraq and stuff, we were shooting them through the window of the building we wanted to, and basically hitting the bad guy we wanted to hit on the nose, and people in the next room were just fine, right? That's the kind of conventional weapons we have now. Why do I need a nuke when I've got and like ATACMs, right, that we just gave Ukraine? That thing's awesome. It's so precise. So like, why do I need a nuke if I can do that, right? So that's kind of why I think the US personally, like totally my opinion, not like actual why we did it, but like what I see is like why we got rid of a lot of our tactical stuff because our just conventional weapons kind of almost surpassed what we could do with a nuclear weapon. So like just just go conventional. And as far as the Chinese, I have no idea. No one knows. Like they're a mystery on their nuclear doctrine.
Yeah. So the next question is, I'll sort of summarize, is like, can you briefly talk about EMP effects and how they relate to nuclear gaming?
Okay, so yes, I will. I tried not to because I That's a hard one to talk about, like really. So EMP, as I mentioned, right? If you have an EMP, any nuclear effect causes an EMP. So if I were to think of the energy that comes out of a nuclear weapon, right? 50% of it goes to blast. It's like 35% goes to the thermal pulse. 15% goes to the radiation, whether that's prompt radiation or the fallout. And it's like 0.1% goes to the EMP. So EMP is not like this huge thing. It's like a kind of like an after effect of the nuclear weapon. And again, near the surface of the Earth, like, if I'm within like where airplanes fly, the EMP is all within the blast and the thermal and the prompt. Like, it's not going to go outside of that. Everything's going to be fine. It's when you get it up into space, like 20 kilometers or more, that's when you start causing a problem, because through a bunch of physics and the Compton scattering of electrons from the gamma rays, Compton scattering of the electrons in the air, they get knocked off their air molecules and spin in the Earth's magnetic field. They release energy in a really quick pulse that causes the EMP effect on the ground and can knock out radios and things like that, right? Knock out things that have power. But it turns out, right, our modern day microelectronics are actually naturally hardened to EMP, as opposed to like old things that had like much bigger, much more, wires, longer wires that would build up that charge from that quick pulse of energy. So I have a microelectronics with like little, dot transistors and whatnot. They're not very big, so they're not going to capture very much energy. They actually survive pretty well. So I know from a fact, we've done lots of EMP testing on equipment, like military equipment. And when we do that EMP testing, like DTRA and others, they're like, well, we've got the EMP, generator or whatever, gonna hit this tank to see what happens with this airplane. I got a lot of extra space. Let's just throw some other stuff in there and see what happens, right? Like, I'm gonna, they're not gonna put their cell phone. Like, hey, I'm gonna put an iPad in there and see what happens. I'm gonna put a Dell computer, like my government computer, and see what happens. Those actually survive to the military standard of hardness for like our nuclear weapons. Like, they are inherently just EMP resilient, right? It's the things that are made to absorb energy that can have EMP effects from those like altitude EMP bursts. So things like radars, things like antennas, internet routers, they are made to absorb energy, so they will absorb that energy potentially. But most of the time, it's EMP is more of a disruption, is the technical term, but I just call it a circuit breaker, right? Like, oh, I get a power surge, my circuit breaker in my house turned out. All I got to do is go flip it, and my lights turn back on. That's what EMP is. Most of the time, it's going to knock out your radio, and I just got to boot it back up, and it turns right back on. It's not like permanently damaged most of the time. Now it depends, but I'd say most of the time that's what happens. So not a problem when I'm an Army guy. My radio goes out for, it goes out because that happens a lot. And what you do is turn my radio off, turn it back on, hit boots back up. I'm good. I'm talking to my guys. That might take a minute or so. Now, if I'm a radar, like a, air defense radar, and I get knocked out by AMP, and it takes, I have no idea how long I'm not an air defense person at all, but it's gonna take a minute or two, I would assume, for it to boot back up and start tracking stuff again. That's 2 minutes or so, whatever. I don't know. I'm making that number up. That I'm blind. It might even be longer, right? That I'm blind and can't shoot down anything incoming. So could the enemy use a tactic like, I'm going to set off a nuke in space, or, in the atmosphere, and blind your EMP, and then giant salvo that you would normally shoot down and you can't shoot it down? Maybe, but they're banking on that EMP effect happening in it. And from some of the modeling I've seen recently, that might not actually happen. So you might not actually get that effect. So, hey, I can still shoot you down. Or I have other radars that aren't affected that can still catch, that are further away that might still be able to link, and we can, talk to different things and share tracks, I guess. So again, I'm not an air defender, but you could do that. And so if one radar goes down, you got a backup that could work. So may not be as effective as people think.
So the next question is, what can you say about like the environmental impacts of nuclear blast on like water supplies, food sources, and how they can be adjudicated on long term for games?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So that's not something I've ever seen modeled either, much like the psychological effects. Um, so I would say with like the water, we've had that question come up a few times, and I mean, I think the best guess from talking with other like nuke SMEs, right? And people, I do a lot of, I've done a lot of work, have a lot of contacts at Los Alamos and Sandia and Lawrence Livermore. So I talk with them a lot about this kind of stuff. It's a small community of us nuclear nerds. But anyway, so, what would happen if you get water, you have a fallout and some of it goes into a lake that's a water supply and people are drinking out of it. I mean, like I said, it hits the water, it kind of disperses some. So, if you have a concentrated amount of that fallout, that radioactive dust, it's a hazard. But once it's the water and spreads out, it's not as hazardous. But at some point, right, it might, flow down the tube, and you're gonna, you might get some water when you take it out of your tap, some radioactivity, but it's not going to be all of that hit the water initially. It's going to be smaller. So yes, if I after a blast and the fallout rain, gets washed off into the aquifer, and then I drink water from it in my tap, if I had a Geiger counter in my house, yes, it would probably beep at me. But I would, most of our thoughts are it's not going to be so significant that like you can't drink it, right? I mean, if you don't know, bananas are radioactive, right? If you take a Geiger counter to a banana, it will beep because bananas have potassium, which has a naturally radioactive isotope naturally occurring. So are avocados, right? There's actually a measurement of radiation called a BED, or banana equivalent dose. So how many bananas would it take to give me this amount of radiation? It's like a huge amount. But right, like you would die from banana poisoning just from eating too many bananas before you would get sick from, radiation from the banana. So don't like go freak out and be like, I'm never eating a banana again, right? But everything is radioactive around us, right? Another example, if you have a spouse or significant other that you sleep in the same bed with, over the course of the year, you will get a background, like your normal cosmic background radiation from like cosmic radiation and radon in the ground that comes from uranium decomposition in the ground, right? That we normally get as a person living on Earth, you get that same amount from your significant other sharing the bed with you. They are irradiating you. If you're sitting next to someone right now, they are irradiating you right now, right? It's a very like minuscule amount, nothing that's ever going to do anything and make you sick, but right, it is radiation, and so people are scared of radiation, but maybe it's not going to be as significant. Now, if it gets in your food, right, like you have fallout and it lands, and cows eat the radioactive dirt as they eat the grass, or the grass absorbs the radioactive atoms as it's growing, and then the cows eat that, and the cows are radioactive. Again, I don't think it's going to be a significant amount where it's going to make you sick and you couldn't eat it, right? Again, I'm not. I don't think anyone's ever really done the modeling to see. Like, there's no model that exists, but I would say it wouldn't be something that like, oh, this whole population can never eat. All of the cows have to be killed, like mad cow disease. Got it. I don't think it's like that.
So I'm gonna summarize a couple of the questions together because they all sort of reach the same sort of nexus, which is what is your presentation mostly focused on low yield tactical nuclear weapons and how they're not game over. But what is the connection between like broader strategic escalation and sort of the use of tactical nuclear gaming that you've seen?
So that's a great question. I mean, so we have played in my team played in a few games with like our stratcom where they are focused on like, hey, let's look at more weapons. Like, let's look at, strategic exchange, a limited strategic exchange. Like, we're not talking all, like by START treaty or a new START treaty. We have, I think it's like 1550 warheads, right? That's what the U.S. has active. So like, we're not shooting all of them at Russia, and Russia's not shooting at all of their strategic ones at us. We're talking, let's say, 30 each. We shoot 30 at them, different yields, but we're talking hundreds of kilotons. They're shooting 30 at us. What would that do? How would we model that? Right? Things like that. Kind of looking at that. I would say that that's kind of the point of the article. Just to plug my article, everybody go do it. Get up my views for that one, right? But the key point of that is when you talk about nuclear weapons, whatever size you're talking about, right? You have to look at all three levels of war. If you want to look at the effects, even if it's megaton level weapons, right? You have to get down to the tactical level. You have to zoom way, way in to see actually what happened. So again, like I was pointing out, like a carrier strike group, or if I have a single icon on a map representing a brigade, and I do a nuke on that brigade, I can't adjudicate the effects that way. I have to zoom in almost to like the platoon level to actually figure out what happened, right? To get an accurate account. Like, where would those vehicles be? What would be the nuke? So you got to go tactical, even for megaton size, to figure out what are the effects. The impacts of that nuclear event, right, are going to be operational, right? You got to look at the operation. Now, what does that mean? I lost 7 tanks out of my, 50 for my brigade. How does that change my war fight? What does that actually do to me? How do I take care of the casualties? What about other stuff? And then strategically, there's implications. Even for tactical nuclear weapons, there's strategic implications. Hey, the Russians just set off a nuke in Ukraine, right? That is getting every president or prime minister in the world, if that were to happen, right, is going to go to their situation room, and it's going to be like a huge strategic crisis for a less than a kiloton nuclear weapon going off, right? It is going to be huge, right? So that's how, I mean, so you can't just, it's not like tactical or different than strategic. They're all, what I'm talking about goes for everything, unless you're looking at like Russian shot 1,000 nuclear weapons across the United States. Like that's going to be really, really bad. It's not going to wipe the United States off the map. There's going to be most of the population probably still going to survive, right? But you know, that's a different game, because then you've got to look at, well, how do we respond to that? And again, I am a nuclear effects expert. I am not a what is the president going to do expert, right? What is his National Security Council going to advise him to do? And that's a game that I know goes on. Those games go on, right? I'm not, even as a now colonel, I'm not important enough to get invited to those games. So those happen, right? But I'm just kind of trying to make the point that, like, whether you say tactical or non-strategic or strategic, it's all the same when you're talking a limited nuclear exchange, right? A megaton versus a 15 kiloton, they're not that different, right? I mean, yes, it's a little bit bigger, but it's not that much. It's not, a million times bigger. It's only like 10 times bigger. So it's a megaton wouldn't wipe out all of, for instance, a megaton on Washington would not wipe out all of Washington, D.C. by far. You would still have a lot of Washington, D.C. still around. So, like, in fact, I think we did some modeling. If you did a 3 megaton, I'm trying to remember, I think it was a 3 megaton over the Capitol, the Pentagon would be just fine. And so if DC's, and Georgetown would be just fine as well, because that's about the same, like, north south of the Pentagon, right? Completely fine, right? A 3 megaton over the Capitol building, Pentagon just fine. So some thermal effects, but like people in the Pentagon just fine, the building itself just fine. It's kind of something people don't think about, right?
So, on a similar line of thought, it said, your presentation dispelled a lot of misconceptions about nuclear use and nuclear weapons, right? But are there any other blind spots or gaps that are new that I'm assuming that we should consider as we're thinking about nuclear gaming and so forth?
I mean, I think one of the really, something that somebody already brought up that I think is is always intrigued me is the psychological effects, right? Like, what does this do? Because, like, it's easy for me to sit here and go, hey, nukes aren't that bad, right? And the day we sign up, we do another nuclear test, like, I'm gonna be like doing whatever I can, calling every favor to be there to see that mushroom cloud, right? I mean, if we did an above ground test, but I would love to see a nuclear weapon go off, because I spent like so much of my life studying them, and I think they're really cool, right? I never want to see them used again. Definitely don't want us to use them ever. But I just, psychologically, as I say, they're not that bad. I think if it happened, even knowing what I know, I would think I'd be like, if I was out in a war, and like my sister unit just got hit with a nuke, and I heard the bang, saw the bright flash of light, saw the mushroom cloud, I'd be like, I'm fine. I know I'm fine. Trust me, guys, we're good. But I would still be like, oh, I don't want that to happen to me, right? So psychologically is definitely something that I think would be really interesting to study more and like look at more and war game more. Like, but again, I don't know. You would need some like psychologists, I think, to talk about that. And so one small anecdote real quick is we actually did some testing on, kind of related to this, back in '56. It was a series of tests called Desert Rock, out in Nevada. So we actually took soldiers and Marines. We set off some nuclear weapons. These are 10 kilotons from a nuclear artillery shell. Have you ever see like a shot where there's like a big atomic anti-cannon and then like a mushroom cloud? That was from one of those tests. But we had people in tanks, people in jeeps, at a safe distance. We also had soldiers and Marines in foxholes at a safe distance. You can look up Desert Rock and find videos of it online. So I have some of them in my nuke video, the Nuke 101 video. But if you so we had them, and so actually before the event, they did like some psychological profiling and said, hey, you're gonna go out and get nuked. All right, be near a nuke weapon. Do you feel safe? And they were like, most people were like, no way, no way. And then they did some training. They just said, hey, they explained nuclear weapon effects. Said, here's what actually happens, and you're going to be outside of all of those rings I just showed, you're going to be fine. And so I think it was 30% of people said, yep, I'd be fine to go out there and do that. I'm not at all nervous anymore. And then they did the testing. And so they set this nuclear weapon off. They're safe in foxholes. They get up and they actually walked to ground zero close. I mean, they got closer in the tanks as they're more shielded, but they walked to within a kilometer. I think they drove to within like a couple hundred meters of it till the radiation started getting bad. And they said, okay, turn around and go back. But they did this, and those people are like, wow, okay, like we were totally fine. And so like it was after the testing, 70% of the respondents said, yeah, I'd have no problem fighting on a nuclear battlefield. Like I've seen it. You trained me on it. You showed it to me. Okay, I believe you now. I'm not going to be scared. So I mean, I think that's a really interesting thing to me. Like, what would be the psychological effects, and looking at that and being able to show, like, what are the benefits of us thinking about this and training on it for our troops so that we are a more effective fighting force because we've been trained.
So I'll ask sort of one of the final questions, which is, as a game designer myself, right? One of the things I always am curious about is what is one thing we in your games that you've seen or heard about or participated in or been part of, what is one thing about nuclear, adjudication or wargaming that games don't get right and that you think should be done XYZ way?
Oh, so that's a great question. I mean, so again, all the games I've been in that have gone nuclear, I've been running the nuclear part for it. So like people like I supported the Joint Staff's Global Integrated War Game for 4 years, and they basically like just said nuke you. Like they're like, yo, Jim's here, do the nukes, right? Like, so it went well because I was doing it. Right? I didn't ever really see a lot of other people, do it wrong, and usually we would catch it before something like that happened. I would say one of the hardest things with trying to put nuclear into a game, right, is if you're gonna do Fallout, which is important, you need to have wind as a factor in your game. And most games don't because it doesn't usually apply to anything. Like any of your conventional weapons aren't affected by the wind, or it's not something you care about, or it's already in your dice roll, right? Like, hey, if it's super windy, there's a probability of this happening, an average in this area. We're gonna knock down the probability by 1 when we roll, right? You don't ever like what way is the wind blowing and how strong is it blowing. So that's always something that we've had to get introduced into a game and like, well, how do you guys do wind? And they're like, we don't. And we're like, okay, well, I need to know which way it's blowing so I can put the fallout plume on the map or in the game and adjudicate it. How are we going to do that? So, we always come up like one way we do it is like a dice roll. And way back on my slides when I had the one about like, so you want to do a war game, what do you do? And I had like a little really cheesy little kind of picture there of like some little squares and stuff. That's actually a really cheesy war game I made up for my kids. Some of my kids do Civil Air Patrol, and they wanted me to come do a talk on nuclear weapons and play a war game. And so I made that up, and it's for 2 people. It takes like 5 minutes max. But you roll dice, and if you roll a 1, the wind goes up. If you roll a 2, it goes down, or 3, something like that. There's like ways the wind go based on your dice roll if there's fallout. So that's one way to do it. We did it with dice. Like, hey, roll a dice. If you have a hex, right, roll a 6-sided dice and whichever, assign 1 through 6, and that's the way the wind's gonna go. And you plot it that way, if that makes sense. So I would say that's like kind of the one thing I've seen is like just you need wind. And also a lot of games, like some of the computer games we've played, don't have a way to adjudicate you over time. So if you do have someone that goes and sits in a Fallout and you're like, well, how do I, I'm having to keep track with that Fallout table or whatever, like how much dose, and like, okay, now those guys are gonna die in 12 hours or 24 hours because you didn't move them. Most games don't have a way to, either you're dead or you're not dead when a strike happens. So to like keep track and go, well, those guys are going to die down the road is something that I've seen is something that's harder to do. And so we've come up with like little tables, like, okay, this unit got exposed. We're gonna, degrade them by 50% in 6 hours and then 100% in 12 hours or whatever it might be. So that's something that, is a challenge. Is this a unique thing about nuclear weapon effects is those delayed reductions or degradation that's just not a normal conventional kind of thing.
No, that's great. I would have never considered win as an important factor in most of my conventional games, so that's something I've learned. I knew playing all those Age of Sail games would come in handy and get to use those win mechanics. So on behalf of the Georgetown University Wargaming Society, Jim, I want to thank you for sharing us your expertise and answering so many great questions. And thank you to our audience for joining us. And this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sebastian. I appreciate it.